You're absolutely correct. Even within the Muslim community here in the United States, because we have a large immigrant population that has come from all over the world, they don't really understand this 401 years of what I think you heard that. Not going to compete with that. 401 years of what has happened to the Black community here in the United States. They really don't understand because they haven't studied it. They haven't read upon it. They don't understand, like you said, the systematic racism that has been embedded in the foundation of the United States, whether it comes to housing, healthcare, education, you name it, it has always worked to a disadvantage to the Black community in the United States. So when they say things like, oh, this community is just not working hard enough, or they just want to like stay home and not do anything, they don't understand that the system is rigged against them, right? And that we have to be allies in working against that and changing the policies that have mandated these rules, that have put a structure down in the foundation that, you know, people from the Black community can't get fair housing, right? They're always being moved around for new companies and corporations wanting to take over neighborhoods and push the Black community out, right? There always is a distinction between who they're allowing to come into their colleges. So all these things are part of the problem. And you quoted Ibram Kendi's book of how can you be an anti-racist? And in his book, his introduction is just about that. Like, what does it mean to be an anti-racist? It's not enough just to say, I'm not a racist, right? You actually have to do work. And you saying what you just said is allyship is not disappearing. I think that is just so profound, because it's the physical work that needs to be put in. It's you being present. It's you being actually in the moment, going and actually doing things that are going to bring about that change, whether it's talking to your elected officials or bringing up issues that you feel are racist against the Black community. All these things that people need to see and hear has to come out. But because and I can speak on behalf of the Muslim community, is because they don't know, especially anybody who is, 35 and older, who might have come here as an adult, didn't really get that education. And even for those of us who did grow up here, like you said, you get to learn a certain, history point of view, right, when it comes to schools.
But none of us would tolerate what has happened, and been revealed under COVID-19, right? The disproportionate impact on communities that have always been disproportionately affected. So for some people, it wasn't a surprise, but for too many people, that's a tolerable impact of the number of deaths. And even in Loudoun County, the impact on Hispanics in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that somehow it's tolerable. When we look at education, it's tolerable that some kids are afforded an opportunity to really achieve academically, and some aren't, and that's tolerable, and then we want to blame parents and others. But I stand up and speak on behalf of all children and all families when I represent Leesburg. I don't represent one party over the other, and that may not make some people happy, but I believe in people over politics at the end of the day. I have my personal politics and my values, but every human life is sacred in the faith tradition I come from. And so when I'm speaking at the school board meeting, I'm speaking on behalf of all children, even if the issue might be equity. Not so some people don't show up because my child isn't personally affected. And you're right, they have excuses. And we don't want to necessarily start calling people out, but I think what we want people to do now is rise up. You say stand up. So on May 31st, we had a silent walk in Leesburg, and it was really about standing up and sending a love card to the George Floyd family in Minneapolis. And we expected 200, we got over 1,500. And people brought their families. They brought their children in strollers. It was intergenerational, interfaith, multi-politically disciplinary event and activity, because people now, and we've seen it these last few weeks, and we'll continue to see it, people are showing up. But you're right, the second part of it is, what do I do now? How do I become more involved? What's the investment? What does it take to be an ally? How do I learn? Who's gonna, partner with me? Who's gonna have space and tolerance for me, for my intolerance or for my learning? And basically the question is, where is it safe to have these dialogue and discussion? Is it safe in the mosque? Is it safe? And where is it safe? in our communities. So people are imposing upon their personal friendships and personal relationships. I've gotten a few late night texts and emails from people around the country who've been perplexed. Um, but it's also that time to have those honest conversations in our community where we can. So I hope to see more programs, more people listening in on events and activities like this, and giving us a chance to really have these conversations that may be a little bit difficult to have, but the outcome is that we want the partnerships for all of our events and activities, for all of our missions, all of our values, all of our programs and services, to really impact the greater community. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not just because there are killings now, as if there never were murders before.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we're trying to do within the Northern Virginia Muslim community is allow a platform to happen, is to have a platform to happen where we're bringing race equity educators from the Black community to talk about what that means to the Muslim community. Because again, these are people who have no idea what's going on. They don't understand the backbone and the history of what has happened in the 401 years. So we have to start them from like basic information and then build them up, give them that framework, give them that knowledge, and then tell them what it means to be an ally, why you have to work. And then even the difference between equity and equality are so different, right? Equity doesn't mean you give everyone the same thing. Because when you give that, it does not mean you're being equal, but you're not being equitable, right? What the challenges that one person has, if you give them the same thing that somebody else has, and they're not being benefited from that, you're not equitable, right? So all these things are part of this process that we need to educate within our own community, within our communities where we think we don't have racism, or because like we said, right, our faith says one thing but we do something else. And what does that really mean? And allowing people to have that platform to have this conversation and bring in people who can actually have these difficult conversations. And difficult conversations are what makes people change. It brings in the information that you would normally not hear. It brings in things that you might reflect back on yourself and say, wait, that actually does happen in my family. We do use slurs. We do make fun of people. We do say, oh, my daughter's not going to marry him because he's Black, or my son's not going to marry her because she's Black, or and bring that racism in the house. But then they say, oh, we're not racist. I'm like, well, no, that you're actually are racist. You're just not seeing it that way. So we have to point it out, so that they understand that we're not saying something to degrade them. We're saying something that has to, like you said, change their frame of mind and how they're thinking. I remember I was on a Zoom call on a board, and this one man who was from the India subcontinent said, oh, there's no racism here. No one's racist against me. This is not a color issue. And almost everybody on the screen was white except one Black guy, and he was quiet. And I was like, wait, did I just hear that right? Like, did he just say this is not a color issue? And I had to call him out. And when I called him out, that actually gave the only other Black person on that call to say something after me, because he felt like he didn't have anyone to make that space for him. These things, when we let it go, build up, right? So we have to call it out. We have to be the ones actually, giving people that space to have this conversation.
You just defined and you demonstrated what an ally really does, right? And if he had called him out, if the other Black guy had called out the other guy, people might have said, well, of course he's going to call him out. But the fact that you did it is what gives us additional courage. When our allies don't come to our rescue, our allies just call it out.
Right.
You don't always have to be the ones, calling it out. And whatever it is, if it's anti-Semitism, whatever it is, wherever we hear things, we can't just wait on the people we think might be most affected. So allies, again, do the work, and they demonstrate. But we also need the political allies. We can talk about allies in a lot of different categories, but I can tell you that Thurgood Marshall once said there are these unintended consequences of busing, because he didn't vote for busing. That was the congressional solution to separate but equal. But what he thought separate, what equal meant was supposed to be equal funding so that the schools and the communities could remain intact where they were, just give them the resources, not bust them out of their neighborhoods and send them a different place and then devalue the schools in their community with less funding and less qualified teachers. So I think we also have to look at what we expect from our political allies in terms of policies and the structures, the governmental structures that we need for programs and support. So it just doesn't come from the people. And hopefully that'll give other folks courage. So we talked a little bit earlier about the Confederate statue. Well, I remember 2 years ago, Loudoun County Board of Supervisors did not vote to send a letter to Richmond asking for what's called home rule, the self-determination piece. And they said in any other circumstance, they probably would have voted for self-determination because that's what people want. But because it was this particular issue, they didn't trust the people to do what it was that they wanted to have done. So now you get a new Board of Supervisors, you get a new Virginia House of Delegates in the state Senate, and they believe that people should determine, not government.
Yeah, we're going to get into that because that's a really interesting topic to talk about.
I like political allies when they work. When they don't work, I've got other things to say.
Absolutely, because this is not just someone who can say, oh, racism ends with me and it's just about me. It's a personal thing. You know, there's systematic problems in this country, you know, and it ties back to politics. At the end of the day, that's all that's going to change things. Like when you think about the movements and what things have actually changed, it's because there were political movements that have happened in order to bring that change. So, you know, we need to be allies in that as well, and giving space for those changes to happen. And I'm glad that, you know, although we see the amount of the influence of, you know, the enslavement that has happened, especially in Northern Virginia, where there's so many burial grounds, and, you know, just in the Loudoun Freedom Center and the work that Pastor Michelle has been doing and bringing all of this into light. I remember, you know, I had posted something about 2 years ago. You were there when we went to a site where there was a burial ground of the enslaved, where they wanted to demolish it. And, you know, we were doing like covert, you know, trespassing in the middle of a snowstorm. But, you know, I thought to myself when I went home, you know, I have never committed a crime before. In New York City, I'm doing it now here with a pastor, but that's okay. We didn't get caught. So things like that, in educating myself, because, you know, me thinking, oh, I might know everything. I don't know everything. I don't even know half of it, right? But that's the whole process, right? And that's what we want people to understand, is that they have to look within themselves and change the views that they have and change the mindset that they have, because it's definitely not what they think it is. And we talked about, you know, listening, right? This is another word that has been pushed around so much these days, of allowing the Black community to have a platform where people can listen to them. Now, people are listening and they're getting the information coming in, but like you said, is listening enough? What happens after that? It's the movement.